The anime begins on Jeju Island, where a group of sailors is talking about the chaotic situation they are facing. They discuss with a sense of helplessness that human weapons are simply not enough to combat the creatures that have emerged. Only hunters and individuals with extraordinary abilities have the necessary strength to face them. Soon we are introduced to a group of hunters preparing for the confrontation. The ants are monstrous creatures that begin to attack violently. Among the hunters, a tanker steps forward to take the hits, protecting his companions. The sorcerers in turn cast powerful fire spells on the ants, but the attacks seem to have no effect. The creatures continue to advance and start devouring the mages, who fight desperately to protect themselves. In a critical moment, one of the mages watches in horror as his friends are consumed by the ants. When one of the creatures is about to kill him, a healer appears quickly, healing all his wounds. The ants turn their attention to the healer, but another hunter with lightning magic launches an attack, devastating, repelling the creatures. Realizing that the hunters are rank S, the situation takes a new turn. At that moment, a terrifying and gigantic white ant appears before the two hunters. They launch a joint attack, managing to deliver a powerful blow, but the ant retaliates, and in a brutal exchange of blows, one of the hunters hits a vital point of the creature, defeating it. However, soon 5 more identical ants appear, and the hunters, now in total such harmony, use their powers in an impressive fight, launching powerful attacks against the creatures. At the same time, on the other side of the island, a group of hunters faces a wave of red and white ants. One of the hunters, notably overpowered, uses a devastating fire magic, scorching the red ants. However, the white ants seem immune to the fire and continue their advance, forcing the hunters to fight with all their might. In the initial moments of the conflict, the portals that suddenly appeared were a great surprise to humanity. Initial attempts to combat the creatures failed miserably. Only the hunters, people with supernatural abilities, could face these threats. Within this class, a hierarchy was established, with rank S being the most powerful and rank E the weakest. Among the hunters, Sung Jin-Woo stands out, the rank E hunter known as the weakest of all. He prepares for a new adventure as he crosses a portal. On the way, he meets Hyler Dior, and together they join a group of hunters to face the challenges of the dungeon. During the journey, one of the hunters jokes, telling Jin-Ho to stay behind so he doesn't get hurt. Jin-Ho, however, is caught off guard and almost finds himself swept away by the battle. A goblin starts attacking him incessantly, and after trying to fight back, Jin-Ho ends up breaking his dagger. The goblin lands a blow that pierces his body, leaving him injured on the ground. The healer from Ore quickly begins to heal him while the rest of the group eliminates the monsters. Although hardly any mana crystals have fallen, Jin-Ho manages to obtain only an E-rank essence. During the exploration, one of the hunters finds a hidden tunnel, and the seemingly ordinary dungeon turns out to be a double dungeon. The group discusses whether to advance or not, as they needed more mana crystals, which are worth a lot of money. After a vote, the majority decides to continue, with Dino's vote being crucial to break the tie. He needs money to pay for his sister's college and his mother's hospital expenses. After 40 minutes of exploring the tunnel, the group arrives at the dungeon's boss room. Upon entering, they are confronted with giant statues, including one that is seated on a throne. There are no monsters in the room, only a statue holding a book of commandments. Jorei notices that one of the statues moves its eyes, and in the next instant the door closes, trapping everyone inside the room. One of the hunters, while trying to reach the door, is decapitated by a fatal blow. Panic overtakes the group. Dino, recalling the weaker dungeons where he almost lost his life, finds himself paralyzed by the situation. One of the statues moves and shoots a beam from its eyes, resembling a cyclops. A hunter is instantly turned into barbecue, while the others barely manage to dodge. Jinho, gripped by fear, feels the weight of the pressure on his shoulders. The group leader, Mr. Song, speaks firmly, instructing no one to move. Jion observes closely and notices that the leader has lost an arm. Quickly, he grabs a bandage and applies it to stop the bleeding. Mr. Song with difficulty says that this dungeon is rank A or S, and then reminds everyone of the 3 commandments that govern that place. First, worship God. Second, praise God. And third, prove your faith. Meanwhile, at college, Jion's sister talks with a friend. They discuss the challenges of daily life, completely unaware of Jinho and his group's struggle. Back in the dungeon, the leader tries to stay calm and assure them that they will find a way out. However, before anyone could respond, one of the hunters, desperate, gathers all his strength to try to escape. He runs towards the door but is brutally struck, leaving only his shin behind. The group realizes with a chill down their spine that there is no way to escape. Dinho, with his thoughts racing, wonders why the statues haven't killed everyone yet. He begins to realize that the commandments might be the key to getting out alive. He then decides to worship God following the first commandment. To his surprise, the action seems to work. Seeing this, he turns to the group and asks everyone to follow his example. They all bow, and the moment they do, the statue opens a macabre and threatening smile. One of the hunters, relieved, stands up and celebrates, thinking the attack has stopped. However, the statue rises again in a strange manner with an even more disturbing smile. The leader, perplexed, asks Dio, what they should do now. Another hunter, deciding to follow the second commandment, tries to praise God but is immediately trampled by the statue, which destroys him mercilessly. Hunter Park, desperate, tries to flee but is cut in half by the statue. Meanwhile, another hunter is struck with a fatal blow. Jin-Ho watches closely and realizes that the statues have instruments. He quickly gives orders for each member of his group to position themselves near a statue. As soon as the group follows his instructions, the statues begin to play. Place their instruments. Jim rushes towards the last statue, believing that there lies the key to his survival, but on the way his leg is crushed by the statue. Even so, he doesn't give up and reaches the statue, where he manages to save himself. Dior tries to heal him but realizes there's not much that can be done. A guy from the group starts blaming the leader for the situation, accusing him of being responsible for the tragedy. Suddenly, an altar mysteriously appears in the center of the room. Dior observes closely and realizes that the statues are demanding sacrifices. One of the hunters, in an act of desperation, threatens the leader, demanding that he sacrifice himself to save the others. The leader, with no alternative, walks to the altar. As soon as he enters, a flame ignites. Dior then asks to be taken to the altar, fearing that a dungeon break might occur, which would allow these horrible creatures to escape into the outside world. Meanwhile, his sister Dina visits their mother in the hospital, unaware of what is happening with her brother. Dino observes that the flame ignites every time a person enters the altar. With everyone in the circle, blue flames begin to shine and the door opens. The statues start to move again, a woman seeing the opportunity to escape. She runs to the door, but the blue flames begin to extinguish. The other hunter also tries to flee. Jinho, desperate, asks that no one leave the altar, but another member of the group also decides to run. The leader, seeing the situation, asks Jinho and Diore to flee. However, Diore, exhausted from using so much magic, can no longer walk. Jinho asks the leader to take Diore, and in an act of heroism, he picks her up in his arms and begins to flee. Jean, on the other hand, accepts his fate. He prepares to fight to the end, raising his sword, deciding to take at least one of the enemies with him. The statues begin to massacre him, striking with immense force. When he is about to receive the final blow, Jeon rethinks his actions, remembering his family and how much he still has to live for. With his life on the brink of ending, a mysterious light appears before his eyes. A system activates and he accepts the proposal. At that moment, he becomes a player. Jinho wakes up in the hospital with the feeling that something is not right. To his surprise, his leg is completely intact with no sign of injury. 2 association managers appear shortly after, and he discovers that he was unconscious for 3 days. They inform him that Mr. Song and Jo Hai survived the confrontation, but Jo Hai was left psychologically very affected by the experience. The White Tiger Guild was the one who found Jinho unconscious and alone on the battlefield. Jin Chul, one of the managers, then asked Jinho with a curious look if he went through the second awakening. Jinho, excited by the question, hopes that he has finally reached a new level of power. However, when they check his mana power, they realize that he remains the weakest hunter in the world, which deeply discourages him. After this conversation, the managers say goodbye and leave. Jinho is left pondering why they didn't mention the screen that appears to him, a mysterious screen that only he seems to see. At that moment, Sua, his sister, appears at the hospital, worried. He decides to ask her if she can see the screen, but she, concerned about his mental state, thinks he is delirious and starts to doubt his sanity. Jinho tries to play it off, attempting to convince his sister that everything is fine, but she, feeling uneasy, says she will leave soon. Alone, Jinho looks at the Force Area mission, and although he knows he needs to complete it, he feels lazy and decides not to do it. Elsewhere, Choi tells Charon that he must train the weaker hunters, while the mysterious portal opens in the middle of a highway. However, Jinho does not complete the area mission, and as a consequence, he receives a penalty. He is transported to a desert. In the desert, a huge centipede appears behind him, licking its lips, and Jinho finds himself forced to survive for 4 hours with no chance of escape. He runs desperately, trying to save himself, but over time his strength begins to wane. 2 hours pass, and he is already exhausted, unable to continue. When the centipede prepares to devour him, the mission finally comes to an end, and he is suddenly transported back to the hospital. The next day, Dior goes to visit Dinho, but he is not in the room. She finds him running around the hospital, having finally completed his daily mission. Back in the room, Dino sees what he received as a reward for the mission. A key appears before him, a key that will allow him to enter a dungeon. He decides to go out to the street and using this key accesses the dungeon, entering a parallel dimension. There he realizes that this instance is completely different from the previous ones. Goblins appear before him, but Dinho, more agile and focused, manages to easily dodge the attacks. In a burst of action, he decides to attack and ends up killing one of the goblins. Then he faces the others, defeating them as well, until suddenly a wolf appears. The wolf, with a swift movement, breaks Gion's dagger and hits him with a direct blow to the face. The wolf leaps towards Gion, but he manages to dodge quickly, feeling his body lighter and more agile than usual. He clenches his fist with determination and with a swift movement delivers a powerful blow to the wolf. Jin-ho starts punching the wolf with force, but soon realizes that his hits are not having the expected effect. He then accesses his inventory and grabs a sword. With a precise slash, he slices the wolf's snout in half. But suddenly 2 more wolves appear, further complicating the situation. Jin-ho's sword ends up getting stuck in the ground, but he struggles to pull it out. With considerable effort, he manages to pull the sword, but one of the wolves grabs the blade with its jaws. Dio, with all the strength he can muster, finally slices the wolf. He starts to feel more confident, thinking that these wolves are nothing compared to the terrible creatures he has faced before. The last wolf, realizing Dio's strength, retreats. Then he realizes that he has leveled up, which gives him a momentary relief. However, he notices that these monsters did not drop crystals, but something different, another type of item. Dio decides then to advance and face the Nanga boss, since he does not have the teleport stone to escape. However, just as he begins to prepare for the battle, the wolf that had fled returns, bringing the entire pack with him. Dio finds himself surrounded by the wolves, but instead of succumbing to fear, he finds courage in the adversities he has already faced. With renewed focus, he starts slicing through the wolves with his sword, one by one, until he finally defeats them all. Dio's sword was completely damaged during the fight, but amidst the chaos, he finds a teleport stone which will allow him to exit the dungeon. Despite this, Jeon decides to continue his journey. He knows he needs to become stronger, and that for this he must face even more challenges. He feels that the battle is becoming easier, especially with the beasts, but as he descends the stairs, a heavy feeling overtakes him. Something powerful is ahead of him. He knows that the only way out will be to become even stronger. Jeon descends to a flooded station, where something fast and immense hits him squarely. As he gets up, he is confronted by a giant serpent with impenetrable scales that seem ready to devour him. The serpent attacks and Jin-ho tries to cut its scales, but he takes a brutal hit and falls into the water. The serpent tries to grab him, but he manages to get out of the water only to be hit again and thrown a great distance. A train is thrown at him and just barely he manages to dodge it. The serpent doesn't give up and lands another blow, but now Jin-ho is furious, activating the power of the system. He grabs onto the snake and with surprising strength breaks one of its scales with his own hands. In a final move, he crushed the snake with all his might, causing it to fall dead to the ground. The reward for the victory was an incredibly sharp dagger. The dungeon then begins to close and Don is transported back to the real world. However, on the other side of the city, a dungeon break is happening. A huge stone beast, terrible and imposing, is attacking. D-rank hunters try to control the situation, but they can't stop the creature. Seeing the chaos, Don makes an impulsive decision. He grabs his broken sword and throws it at the stone beast. An impact that breaks the creature's shield, giving the hunters the chance they needed to finally defeat it. The teamwork now made possible by Dio's strike results in victory, and the creature is finally defeated. Back at the hospital, Jin-ho now trains every day. The nurses, who once saw him as just a simple patient, are now completely charmed by him. One of them, upon seeing him shirtless while he exercises, is visibly impressed and starts to feel attracted to him. When he leaves the room to take another step in his recovery, she, a bit shy, asks for his phone number, clearly showing her interest. Meanwhile, at Jin-ho's house, his sister Dina is watching TV. She watches an interview with Yeon-ho, the leader of the White Tiger Guild, which is one of the most powerful guilds of the time in the region. When Jin-ho leaves the hospital, Dina immediately notices that he is visibly stronger. Jin-ho, for his part, believes that this transformation is related to his status and skills acquired through the system. Determined to earn more money, Jin-ho starts looking for portals to face new challenges. In his search, he encounters a group of hunters led by Dong-suk. Their mission seems simple. Jin-ho ends up being responsible for carrying the group's gear. Along the way, Dong-suk asks Jin-ho to sign a contract formalizing his participation in the team. At that moment, Jin-ho, a new member of the group, appears. Jin-ho, unlike Jin-ho, does not seem to be an ordinary hunter, as he is the heir to a large construction company, and he joins the team to accompany the expedition. The group arrives at the entrance of a rank C dungeon. Upon entering, they are met with total darkness without a source of light. One of the hunters then casts a light spell, illuminating the path ahead. Jin-ho starts hearing sounds coming from above. Soon he realizes that the group is being attacked by monsters. They are insects that begin to attack in a coordinated manner. Dong-suk, the leader of the group, draws the ants towards himself, while Park, the group's mage, casts a fire explosion on the monsters. Jin-ho, in turn, easily takes down one of the insects, and Jin-ho, as always, is just carrying the group's equipment. However, one of the insects heads directly towards Jin-ho, and without hesitation, he simply delivers a powerful kick. The group begins to collect materials from the creatures. Dong-suk, surprised, thanks Jin-ho and asks how he knew what was going to happen. Jin-ho responds that it was instinct. They notice the injuries on the insects, which seem to have been caused by another monster. Jin-ho begins to suspect Dong-suk for not having a healer in the group. Meanwhile, at the White Tiger Guild, Young-ho destroys a stone wall with a punch. Jin-ho's group then encounters another insect, almost dead, arriving in a room full of mana crystals. Jin-ho questions Jin-ho's contract and Dong-suk tries to cover it up, saying he will find the boss. When they arrive at the boss's room, they discover that he is sleeping. Dong-suk says he needs to fetch equipment, but Jin-ho realizes it's a trap. The mage hits the ceiling to cause a collapse, and the entrance gets covered with debris, and the dungeon boss wakes up. It was a gigantic spider, but Jin-ho feels no fear and decides to face the spider alone. Dong-suk hopes that both Jin-ho and Jin-ho will die. The plan is simple. Let the spider sleep after being fed, take Jin-ho's equipment, and escape through the tunnel. Jin-ho, however, does not give up. He runs towards the spider and lands a series of blows, but soon realizes that he is not having any effect. The spider counterattacks and Jin-ho defends himself, retaliating against the attack. The fight remains evenly matched, but he starts to feel tired. Determined to finish off the spider, he grabs the dagger with the paralysis effect and prepares to use it on the monster spider. In response, it releases a burst of acid, but Jin-ho manages to dodge in time with a quick move. Jin-ho uses a dash and hits the spider, but the paralysis doesn't work. He is getting exhausted, and the spider manages to land a brutal blow on him. Just when Jin-ho seems about to die, he lands a fatal blow on the spider's eye and then delivers several more strikes, until finally defeating it. Jin-ho watches everything with a frightened look, impressed by Jin-ho's strength. In the association's training room, the manager trains with the association's president, but ends up taking a single blow and becoming completely debilitated. Dong-suk's group returns and finds the boss dead. Seeing the situation initially, Dong-suk thinks it was Jin-ho who killed the spider. He then asks Jin-ho to kill Jin-ho. However, Jin-ho refuses and the furious group advances to attack the two. Jin-ho receives a mission from the Lord, from the system, to eliminate the 6 hunters, or he himself will be killed. The mage cowardly casts a spell and hits Jin-ho. Even injured, Jin-ho gets up to face Dong-suk's group. One of the members gets close to Jin-ho but is immediately decapitated. Jin-ho is shaken by having to do this, but he knows he has no choice. Either he obeys the system or he dies. Dong-suk's group attacks together, but Jin-ho manages to defend himself masterfully and kills 2 more with ease. The group's mage casts a fireball, but Jin-ho dodges and quickly eliminates the mage. Dong-suk, seeing his companions fall in a matter of seconds, panics. He concentrates all his power into one last attack, but Jin-ho humiliates him, slamming him face first into the ground with a swift blow. Desperate, Dong-suk begs for his life, but Jin-ho, without hesitation, decisively kills him by cutting off his head. With Dong-suk's fall, the place begins to collapse around them. Jin-ho and Jin-ho are the only survivors of the battle. They explain what happened, acknowledging that despite the adversity, they emerged victorious. Manager Woo discovers that Jin-ho and Jin-wo were the only ones to survive the rank C dungeon and that Dong-suk died during the mission. He is the brother of a hunter. Rank S. Jin-wo arrives home with a chicken. He drinks beer to forget what he did, but the system prevents him from getting drunk. Jin informs that someone named Jin-ho called. He goes out and meets with Jin-ho. He asks Jin-ho for help to become a guildmaster. Jin-ho offers a contract, but Jin-ho refuses, yet Jin-ho offers eternal loyalty. Dong-su, the brother of Dong-su, who is a rank S hunter, asks for details about the 2 survivors of the rank C dungeon. He is certain that his brother was murdered and is determined to take revenge. Dina and Jin-ho run together, and Jin-ho shares with her the billion-dollar proposal that Jin-ho made to him. She comments that the money would be enough to pay for her college and the money she has, and their mother's hospital expenses. Jin-ho then sprints ahead, completing his daily mission. He realizes he has exceeded the limit and decides to continue to see if he would earn something extra. He receives the option to choose between 2 rewards. One of the options is a key to the rank S demonic castle. Jin-ho realizes that the demonic castle is the opportunity he needed to create the elixir of life, something that could save his mother from the illness. Without hesitation, he uses the key and enters the dungeon. The place looks like hell itself, but he carries the teleport stone with him. While exploring, a Cerberus disappears, a 3-headed dog. He attacks it and lands several cuts, but the dog doesn't receive any debuff. The Cerberus then increases its speed and hits John with a bite, taking away half of his life. Exhausted, John tries to escape, but an attack causes him to lose the teleport stone. Even without the stone, Jeon drinks a potion to regain strength and decides to fight to the end. He hits the Cerberus, however, but is bitten again. When he is almost dying, he starts hitting the dog's eyes repeatedly until he finally defeats it. The Cerberus drops the formula for the elixir of life, and John decides not to advance further to avoid the risk of dying. Jin-ho visits his mother in the hospital and vows to do everything to cure her. He tells Jin-ho that he wants to focus on rank C portals and asks him to call some people, but he will take care of clearing the dungeons by himself. Meanwhile, Cha-hen is doing her morning run. The owner of the construction company and Jin-ho's father comments that the resources from the dungeons are extremely valuable, and he states that he will need a guild to access and control these resources, which creates a need to recruit strong hunters. Jin-ho receives a notification from the association informing him that they are in need of rank D hunters. Meanwhile, Jin-ho talks with Choi, and he mentions that the Yodin Construction Company is secretly forming a guild and trying to recruit strong hunters to further strengthen their team. Shaheen meets Yoon-hoo in the hallway and shares with him that she went to talk to Choi, who received an offer from the Yodin Construction Company to become the master of their guild. However, she informs that she declined the offer. Choi thanks her for telling him and says that in the conversation with In-ho-ho, they discussed the situation of the island. Jeju. Choi wants more strong hunters to be able to clear the island in the future. Therefore, he asks Cha-hen for help to train more hunters. Yeonho then goes drinking and gets lost in his thoughts, remembering the friend he lost on the island and feels a strong desire for revenge. Jinho meets with Song, the leader of the group that carried Jo-hai. Song asks about Jinho's leg, and he explains that it miraculously healed in the hospital. Song thinks it must have been a high-rank healer who helped, and Jinho laments seeing Song without an arm. The leader, however, says he's fine. By coincidence, survivors from Jinho's group are there, and they all reunite. They explain that they left him alone in the dungeon. However, Jo-hai comments that Jinho has changed a lot since that day. At the location, they explain that they were there to replace the hunters. Mr. Song thanks Jinho for saving him and the rest of the group. Everyone then prepares to enter the dungeon together. In the dungeon, the prisoners quickly deal with the goblins with ease. Mr. Song casts a single spell, and Jinho also takes down several goblins, impressing everyone. Mr. Song comments that Jinho has become much stronger. The group then encounters 3 tunnels and splits up. Meanwhile, the man from the association stays with the prisoners. He was paid to kill the 3 prisoners, and since there are no witnesses, he believes no one will find out. However, his plan fails when the other 2 hunters catch him in the act. He tries to attack them to kill, as this way there will be no one to tell what he did. Jinho and his group arrive at the location where they find everyone dead, but one of the hunters is still alive. Jinho attempts to heal him, but Jinho, seeing the situation, tells him to fight for his life because he has a family waiting at home. Unfortunately, the hunter does not survive and dies shortly after. The assassin then hides using stealth and tries to attack Jo-hee, but Jinho is quicker and blocks the strike. Seo Ji-young decides to face a man from the association, but the assassin moves incredibly fast, dodging all of Song's strikes. He manages to hit Song, but Jo-hai immediately heals him. Using his stealth, he cuts Song, but Jo-hai can no longer heal him due to the severity of the injuries. When Song, with his last efforts, casts a fire spell. However, the assassin, even more skilled, dodges again. Before the assassin can finish off Song, Jinho intervenes. The assassin, with a psychotic look, draws a second dagger to fight against Jinho. Song watches, frightened, the power of a rank E hunter, especially seeing how fast both of them are. Jinho manages to get cut, but the mission appears on the screen: eliminate the assassin. Jinho activates his speed ability and with a precise strike hits the assassin with the poisoned dagger. The assassin activates his Zei stealth again, but Jinho, now more alert, manages to detect where the attacks are coming from, and with a swift movement strikes the dagger into the assassin's chest. The mission is completed and the assassin is defeated. Dinho finishes Danjo, but soon the manager arrives at the scene. Seeing Dino there again, he asks who killed the assassin Nange. Su-song takes responsibility, explaining that he was the one who killed the assassin as a form of gratitude. He also adds that he trusts Dinho's reason for hiding his true strength, respecting his decision. Jo-hee shows the crystal that Jinho had obtained, asks if he remembers, and hands it to him. Wo warns Dongsu that he has a powerful brother, the rank S hunter. Dongsu recommends that Jinho leave the country with his family to protect themselves. Jinho found people to count as numbers. They will earn 3 million per raid, but the one who will clear the dungeon will be Jinho. Jinho appears with armor that he can barely move in, but soon throws it off and keeps only the helmet. The two enter the dungeon and after some time return after completing the mission. Everyone is surprised by this. They proceed to another one. Dungeon, and Jinho defeats the goblins with one hand in his pocket. At that moment, a snake almost catches Jinho, but he is saved by Jinho. After that, Jinho manages to use the stealth skill. After defeating the association guy and eliminating the monsters in the dungeon, the class change mission appears. Manager Yan from the White Tiger Guild notices that rank C portals were bought for millions and realizes that Jinho is the survivor of the double dungeon. He thinks that Jinho went through a second awakening as he survived 2 critical incidents. Meanwhile, Cho is analyzing a mission that will take place on Jeju Island. Manager An introduces himself to Jinho and invites him for a coffee. He argues that the White Tiger is the best guild in the country and that it pays double what the Yorin Construction Company offered. The construction company offered 30 billion, so double would be 60 billion, and Manager An is shocked by the amount that was offered and says he will have to talk to his superiors. Jinho then becomes invisible and cuts An's cheek, making a slight threat. He knew that no one could know his true strength. Then Jinho begins negotiating the sale of rank C portals, with each portal going for 200 million. In total, the 3 portals would cost 600 million. They close the deal and Jinho confirms that the 600 million has been transferred. The next day, Manager An realizes that he paid too much for the portals and that Jinho deceived him. This was a form of warning for having been spied on. He literally outsmarted Manager An. Jinho accepts the class change quest. An immense power is released and a portal opens in front of him. He enters the dungeon and soon discovers that he cannot use potions or full recoveries. A knight appears and starts advancing towards him. Jinho draws his dagger and strikes the knight, but it has no effect. The knight advances and Jinho tries again, hitting him squarely but still cannot pierce him. He then repeats the technique used on the snake and tears off the knight's skull. With his hands, however, several other knights soon appear. Meanwhile, Jinho has dinner with his father, his brother, and his brother's brother. He comments that all the rank S hunters refused the offers. Jin-Ho, in turn, defeats the knights with brute force, but suddenly new enemies appear. A mage, an assassin, a warrior, and an archer, all attacking him together. Jin-Ho, however, is incredibly fast and manages to counter all the attacks, but he starts to feel fatigued. Even so, he manages to defeat all the enemies and earns an invisible armor as a reward. At the back of the dungeon, a gigantic door appears, probably leading to the boss's room. Jin-Ho enters and encounters a swordsman in red armor, emanating a tremendously powerful aura. He is Igris, the Knight Commander. Igris charges at Jin-Ho with insane speed and nearly slices him in half. The knight's strength is so great that Jin-Ho can barely withstand the blows, but he adapts and manages to hit Igris, although without effect. The knight then swings his sword from top to bottom, but Jin-Ho's reflex saves him. Igris, with strength far superior to Jin-Ho's, continues to dominate him. Jin-Ho then decides to resort to brute force and use his own fist strength. Igris, as an honorable knight, decides to fight on equal terms and buries his sword in the ground. Meanwhile, Choi talks with the association president and mentions that for him the battle on Jeju Island never ended. Igris is incredibly fast and manages to hit Jin-Ho in the pit of the stomach, driving him into the ground and throwing him against the wall. He starts to beat Jin-Ho, but Jin-Ho, with his skill, manages to defend, dodge, and use dash to counterattack. The fight intensifies with Jin-Ho using various skills, but Igris becomes stronger with each blow he receives, and Jin-Ho ends up becoming overwhelmed. Exhausted, he sits on the throne, tired. Meanwhile, Jin-Ho's mother remains in the hospital on the brink of death. Igris draws his sword ready to deliver the final blow. However, Jin-Ho, with all his strength, grabs the sword with one hand and throws it away, and strikes Igris in the eye with the dagger. Then he strikes the knight's neck several times until he finally manages to defeat him. As a reward, Dior receives an S-rank helmet. However, several portals open and many knights appear. Determined, Dior uses his stealth mode to try to survive, but a mage ends up revealing him and a knight hits him squarely in the back. Dior retaliates with brute force, thinking of using the teleport stone, but another enemy appears and hits him squarely, causing Dior to lose the stone. Now all the knights charge at him together. Dio. He is weak and cornered, but even so he charges forward and defeats the enemies with sheer force. Fatigued, he continues taking them down one by one. On the verge of fainting, he begins to hallucinate, but surprisingly regains consciousness. However, a knight throws him face first to the ground and he is on the brink of death. At that moment, Dio is transferred to the penalty arena as he did not complete his daily mission. Who would have thought that this penalty would end up saving his life? He takes his recovery potions and with that fully recovers his fatigue. The centipedes appear, but he defeats them easily. Meanwhile, Dina wakes up and realizes that Dinho hasn't come home yet. Dino then bought a dagger that increases damage against armored beasts by 25%. Now he can slice through his enemies with ease, as if he were cutting through buttered bread. A mage appears, summoning more mobs, but Dinho crosses the sea of knights, and what does he do? He lands a precise blow, taking down the mage. He uses the skill to pull things like Thor with his hammer, but with his dagger, and starts to shred the knights. He almost seems like a different person. A giant golem starts attacking, and without hesitation, Demo throws a chandelier at its head, hitting the golem with force. But the monster charges at him, and even so, Jin-Ho destroys it with just one blow. 4.5 hours later, he finally completes the class change quest and becomes a Death Angel. Now he can have a shadow army. His new class is Necromancer, and he gains the power to extract the shadows of the people he defeats. The class change occurs, and Jin-Ho feels his power increase. He realizes that he can extract the shadows of the soldiers he has defeated and begins to raise some of them. He notices that the shadows have different ranks, so he heads towards Igris and tries to extract his shadow. For this, he needs to sacrifice other shadows, but he fails on the first attempt. With only 2 attempts remaining, he also fails on the second attempt, and now, with just 1 attempt left, Dinho talks to Igris' body and asks him to serve him and continue fighting by his side. On the last attempt, he succeeds, and the extraction is successful. Jin-Ho keeps the name Igris, and now he controls an overpowering shadow. Igris and the other shadows kneel before Jin-Ho, and thus ends the first season. If you like this type of summary, leave a comment so I know you enjoyed it. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.